I never thought 3 hours could feel like both an eternity and the briefest moment of my life. But there I was, frozen on our second-hand couch at 2 in the morning, afraid to breathe too loudly because my roommate Jake was asleep on my shoulder, and moving felt like it would shatter something precious I didn't even know I was holding. Let me back up. Jake moved in 4 months ago, answering my ad for a roommate after my previous one bailed to move in with his girlfriend. I remember opening the door that first day and being struck by how his smile seemed to apologize for taking up space before he'd even stepped inside. He had these warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed, which I'd soon learn happened often, and sandy hair that always looked like he'd just run his fingers through it. He was carrying 2 duffel bags and a houseplant he immediately seemed embarrassed about. "I know it's stupid," he'd said, holding up the little succulent, "but my sister gave it to me and I'm trying to keep something alive for once." That should have been my first clue about the kind of person he was. Gentle, thoughtful, the kind of guy who remembered you mentioned liking a specific brand of coffee and picked it up at the store without making a big deal about it. The kind who'd leave little post-it notes on the bathroom mirror when he knew you had a big presentation at work. "You're going to crush it," they'd say, with a little doodle of a flexing arm that was so badly drawn it always made me laugh. Living with Jake was easy in a way I hadn't expected. My last roommate and I had been cordial, sure, but we'd lived parallel lives in the same space. With Jake, everything felt more collaborative. We fell into routines without trying. He'd make breakfast on weekends, these elaborate omelets, with whatever vegetables were about to go bad in the fridge, turning our tiny kitchen into something that smelled like a home. I'd handle dinner most weeknights, nothing fancy, but he'd always sit at our little table and talk to me while I cooked, asking about my day like he genuinely wanted to know. We started having movie nights on Fridays. It began accidentally when we both ended up home on a rainy evening with nothing to do. He'd suggested we watch something, and I had agreed, expecting we'd sit on opposite ends of the couch in that typical roommate way, maintaining our separate spaces. But Jake had this way of slowly migrating closer as the movie went on, not in a way that felt invasive, just comfortable. By the end of that first movie, we were sitting close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, could smell his laundry detergent, something clean and fresh like cotton. That became our thing. Every Friday, without fail, we'd order takeout and pick a movie. Jake's taste was eclectic, ranging from obscure foreign films to terrible action movies from the 90s. He gets so animated during the good parts, grabbing my arm without thinking, his enthusiasm infectious. During the scary parts, he'd hide his face against my shoulder for just a second before laughing at himself. "I know it's not real," he'd say, "but my brain doesn't care." Those little touches started happening more often. A hand on my shoulder when he passed behind me in the kitchen, his knee bumping against mine when we sat together, his fingers brushing mine when we both reached for the popcorn bowl. Each one felt like a tiny electric shock, leaving me hyper-aware of everywhere we connected. I started noticing other things too. The way he'd bite his lower lip when he was concentrating on something, how his voice got softer late at night when we'd end up talking in the kitchen, both of us unable to sleep. The way he looked at me sometimes, like he was trying to figure something out but wasn't ready to ask the question yet. I'd been telling myself I was imagining things, that the warmth spreading through my chest when he smiled at me was just friendship, that the way I'd started looking forward to coming home, knowing he'd be there, was normal roommate stuff, that lying awake at night, thinking about the way his hair fell across his forehead, or how his laugh sounded when something genuinely surprised him, was just me being observant. I'd gotten really good at lying to myself. The night everything changed started like any other Friday. We'd ordered Thai food, and Jake had picked some indie drama about 2 strangers who meet on a train. The movie was beautiful and melancholy, full of long conversations and meaningful glances. About halfway through, Jake shifted closer, and I felt his weight settle against my side more firmly than usual. I glanced over and noticed his eyes were heavy-lidded, his blinks getting longer. He'd mentioned having a brutal week at work, pulling late nights to finish a project. He looked exhausted. "You okay?" I asked quietly, not wanting to disturb the movie's quiet moment. He hummed, his head tilting slightly toward me. "Just tired. This okay?" His voice was drowsy, soft in a way that made my heart skip. "Yeah," I managed. "Of course." He relaxed more fully against me then, his head coming to rest on my shoulder, his body curving into mine. I could feel his breath, slow and steady, warming the side of my neck. Could feel the solid weight of him, real and present and trusting. My arm was trapped awkwardly between us, but I didn't dare move it. I barely dared to breathe. The movie continued playing, but I couldn't tell you what happened in the second half. My entire world had narrowed to the points where Jake's body touched mine. His head on my shoulder, his side pressed against my ribs, his hand that had somehow ended up resting on my thigh, fingers curled loosely against the denim of my jeans. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out completely, and I realized he'd fallen asleep. I should have woken him up, should have suggested he'd be more comfortable in his bed, should have at least shifted to a position that didn't make my arms start tingling with pins and needles. But I couldn't. I physically could not make myself move. Because this felt like something I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. Like every Friday night had been leading to this moment, building to this quiet intimacy that felt both terrifying and inevitable. So I sat there. I watched the rest of the movie without really seeing it, hyper-aware of every small movement Jake made in his sleep. The way he'd occasionally sigh, soft and content. How his fingers would twitch slightly against my leg. The weight of his head growing heavier as he sank deeper into sleep. At some point, my free hand had moved almost of its own accord, coming to rest gently on his arm, and he'd shifted closer in response, a small, unconscious movement that made something in my chest crack wide open. The movie ended. Credits rolled. The screen returned to the streaming service menu, bathing the dark living room in a soft blue glow. I should have moved then, should have gently woken him. But I didn't. I used the remote to turn off the TV, plunging us into darkness broken only by the streetlight filtering through our curtains, and I stayed exactly where I was. Time did strange things in that darkness, minutes stretched like taffy, each one feeling impossibly long and yet passing too quickly. My arm had gone from tingling to properly numb, but I couldn't bring myself to care. This felt too important, too fragile, like I was holding something precious that might never come back if I let it go. So I stayed frozen, barely moving, just feeling the rise and fall of Jake's chest against my side, the warmth of him seeping into me. My mind was racing even as my body remained still. I thought about the past 4 months, seeing everything in a new light. All those small moments that I'd convinced myself were nothing suddenly rearranged themselves into a pattern I'd been too scared to recognize. The way Jake always seemed to find reasons to be near me. How he'd light up when I came home. Those post-it notes that said more than just friendly encouragement. The way he'd look at me sometimes when he thought I wasn't paying attention. His expression soft and wondering and maybe a little afraid. He'd been building up to something, I realized. We both had. Dancing around each other for months, neither of us brave enough to name what was happening between us. Because naming it would make it real, and making it real meant risking everything. Our easy friendship, our comfortable living situation, the best thing that had happened to either of us in a long time. But here, in the darkness, with Jake's sleeping weight against me and his hand on my leg and his breath warm on my neck, it already felt real. It felt like the most real thing I'd ever experienced, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I couldn't go back to pretending I didn't feel this. Whatever this was. Around the 2-hour mark, I started to notice other things. The way Jake's hair smelled faintly of his shampoo, something citrusy and clean. How perfectly he seemed to fit against my side, like our bodies had been designed to align exactly this way. The trust inherent in the way he slept, completely relaxed, completely unguarded. He felt safe with me, safe enough to let his defenses down, to be vulnerable, to literally lean on me. That realization made my throat tight with emotion I didn't have names for. My shoulder was aching now, a dull throb that spread down my arm and up into my neck. My back was starting to protest the awkward angle. My numb arm had progressed beyond pins and needles into that strange dead weight feeling where you're not entirely sure it's still attached. None of it mattered. I would have sat there for 3 more hours, for 30 more hours, if it meant not disturbing this moment. I let myself imagine, in the safety of the darkness, what might happen when he woke up. Would he be embarrassed? Would he pull away quickly, apologizing, putting distance between us? Or would he meet my eyes and see everything I'd been trying to hide written plainly on my face? Would he be scared? Relieved? Would he finally say the things I thought I saw in his eyes sometimes, but never dared to hope were real? The scariest thought was that maybe this didn't mean to him what it meant to me. Maybe he really was just tired, and I was reading significance into something simple. Maybe I was about to ruin everything by feeling too much, by wanting something he'd never meant to offer. That fear sat cold in my stomach, even as the warmth of him against my side made me feel more alive than I had in years. Around hour 3, Jake started to stir. Small movements at first, a shift of his head, his fingers flexing against my thigh. I felt my heart rate spike, my breath catching. This was it. The moment would end, and I'd find out what came next. I tried to prepare myself for disappointment, for awkwardness, for the careful rebuilding of boundaries that had somehow dissolved. His hand moved first, sliding slowly up from my thigh to my stomach, and I realized with a jolt that he wasn't quite awake yet, still caught in that space between sleeping and waking. His arm wrapped more fully around my waist, and he pressed closer, his face turning into my neck with a soft sound that was almost a sigh. My free hand, still resting on his arm, tightened involuntarily, and that seemed to wake him more fully. I felt the exact moment awareness returned. His body went still, his breathing hitching. For several long seconds, neither of us moved, neither of us spoke. We just sat there in the darkness, both pretending he was still asleep, both knowing the pretense was paper thin. I could feel his heart beating faster where his chest pressed against my side, could feel the tension entering his muscles as consciousness fully returned and he realized the position we were in. "Jake," I said quietly, my voice rough from hours of silence. "It's okay." He didn't pull away, but he didn't relax either. "How long was I asleep?" His voice was low, careful, still muffled against my shoulder. "A while." I paused, gathering courage I didn't know I had. "About 3 hours." I felt him tense further. 3 hours? Why didn't you move? Your arm must be killing you." "I didn't want to wake you." It was the truth, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was so much bigger and scarier that I could barely wrap my own mind around it. "You sat here for 3 hours because you didn't want to wake me." There was something in his voice I couldn't quite read. Disbelief, maybe, or hope, or fear, probably all three. Yeah, my heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could feel it. I did. Jake finally pulled back, and I felt the loss of his warmth like a physical ache. But he didn't move away entirely. In the dim light from the street I could just make out his face, his expression uncertain and vulnerable and searching. We were still close enough that I could feel his breath, could see the way his eyes moved over my face like he was trying to memorize it, or maybe trying to read an answer to a question he hadn't asked yet. "Why?" The word was barely a whisper, but it held everything. All the weight of 4 months of almosts and maybes and what-ifs. I could have deflected, could have made a joke or given a casual answer that would have let us both retreat to safety. But something about those 3 hours, about the feeling of him trusting me enough to sleep against me, about the way he was looking at me now like I held something precious he was afraid to reach for, made me brave. "Because," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "it was the best 3 hours of my life, and I wasn't ready for them to end." I watched emotions flicker across his face too quickly to name. His eyes went wide, then soft, then bright, with something that might have been tears, or might have been hope, or might have been both. His hand, which had pulled back when he sat up, reached out tentatively, his fingers brushing my jaw with a gentleness that made my breath catch. "Really?" he asked, and there was so much vulnerability in that single word that I felt it in my chest like a physical thing. "Really," I confirmed. "Jake, these past 4 months, you've become the best part of my day, every day. And I kept telling myself it was just friendship, that I was imagining things, but then you fell asleep on my shoulder and I couldn't move because moving meant letting go, and I'm so tired of letting go of things before I even let myself have them." A sound escaped him, half laugh and half something else, and then his hand was cupping my face properly, his thumb brushing my cheekbone. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you," he said. Every day I'd think maybe today's the day I'll be brave enough, and then I'd chicken out because what if I was wrong? What if you didn't feel it too? I couldn't risk losing this, losing you, even if it meant never having more. You weren't wrong, I said, and my own hand came up to cover his where it rested against my face. You were never wrong. We sat there for a moment, both of us taking it in, letting the truth of it settle. 4 months of dancing around each other, of careful touches and lingering looks and unspoken feelings, all crystallizing into this single perfect moment of mutual understanding. The relief of it was almost overwhelming. I fell asleep on purpose, Jake admitted suddenly, a shy smile tugging at his lips. Well, not exactly on purpose. I really was exhausted. But when I felt myself starting to drift off, I thought maybe if I let myself have this one thing, just this once, it would be enough. But then I woke up and you were still here and you'd stayed and you said, he trailed off, his smile growing. 3 hours? 3 hours, I confirmed, smiling back. My arm is completely dead, by the way. I don't think I'll ever feel my fingers again. He laughed then, that full, genuine laugh I loved, and shifted so he could gently pull my numb arm into his lap, starting to massage, feeling back into it with careful fingers. The sensation of pins and needles returning was intense, but I barely noticed because I was too focused on the way he was touching me now, purposeful and tender, and without any of the careful casualness we'd both been hiding behind. For what it's worth, he said, still working on my arm, you're the best part of my day, too, every single day. Coming home knowing you'll be here, or getting home and finding you already there, it's like everything else in the world gets quieter. Better. I've never felt this comfortable with anyone. Comfortable enough to use me as a pillow for 3 hours, apparently, I teased, and he looked up at me with such warmth in his eyes that I felt it all the way through. Comfortable enough to fall asleep, he said seriously, to let my guard down completely. Do you know how rare that is? I haven't felt safe like that in maybe ever. But with you I do. I feel safe enough to be exactly who I am, even the parts I usually keep hidden. The weight of that confession sat between us, precious and profound. I understood what he meant because I felt it too. This sense that I could be fully myself, vulnerable and uncertain and hopeful, and it would be okay, that he'd see all of me and not turn away. So what happens now? I asked, though I thought I knew, hoped I knew. Jake finished massaging my arm and laced his fingers through mine instead, holding our joined hands between us. Now, he said, I'd really like to kiss you if that's okay. And then maybe we could talk about how we want to do this, because I don't want to mess it up. You're too important. That's very okay, I managed, my heart racing again. More than okay. He leaned in slowly, giving me time to change my mind, to pull back. But I'd never been more certain of anything. When his lips met mine, soft and questioning and perfect, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like every moment of the past 4 months had been leading here, to this. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of us learning this new language, but then his hand came up to cup the back of my neck, and I pulled him closer, and gentle gave way to something deeper, more certain, a promise and a question and an answer all at once. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Jake rested his forehead against mine. I don't want to go to my room tonight, he whispered. I don't want to be separate anymore. Then don't, I whispered back. Stay. And he did. We eventually moved from the couch to my bed, but only to be more comfortable. We stayed up for hours more, talking about everything and nothing, trading kisses and confessions in the darkness. He told me about the first moment he knew he was feeling something more, how it had scared him and thrilled him in equal measure. I told him about lying awake thinking about him, about the way his presence had become essential to my happiness without me even noticing it happening. As dawn started to lighten the sky outside my window, Jake was curled against my side again, his head on my chest this time, my arms wrapped securely around him. He was drifting off to sleep again, and this time I knew when he woke up, everything would be different, better, real in a way we'd both been too afraid to reach for before. Hey, I said softly, and he hummed in response. Thank you for falling asleep on my shoulder. I felt him smile against my chest. Thank you for not moving, he murmured. For 3 entire hours. You're crazy, you know that. Yeah, I agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. But I think we might be the good kind of crazy. The best kind, he agreed, and then he was asleep again, safe and warm, and exactly where he belonged. 3 hours had changed everything. 3 hours of staying still, of being brave enough not to run from something that scared me, of letting myself have something I wanted more than I'd ever wanted anything. 3 hours that led to this. Jake sleeping peacefully in my arms, no more pretending, no more careful distance, just us, finally honest about what we'd been building all along. I stayed awake a little longer, watching the sunrise paint the room in shades of gold and pink, feeling the steady rhythm of Jake's breathing, and thinking that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is absolutely nothing at all. Sometimes staying still, staying present, staying open to possibility even when it terrifies you, that's where the magic happens. My shoulder would probably hurt for days. My arm had only recently regained feeling. I'd spent 3 hours in an uncomfortable position, afraid to move, barely breathing. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I'd do it every night for the rest of my life if it meant more moments like this, more of Jake's trust and warmth and love. Because that's what this was, I realized. Love. Maybe it had been all along, growing quietly in the spaces between us, in the post-it notes and the Friday movie nights and the comfortable silences, in the way he made me want to be braver, better, more honest, in the way he saw me and chose to stay anyway. I finally let myself drift off to sleep as the sun fully rose, Jake still secure in my arms, and my last thought before sleep claimed me was simple and true and perfect. This was worth the wait. All of it. Every uncertain moment, every careful touch, every night spent wondering if he felt it too. It was all worth it for this, for him, for us. 3 hours. That's all it took to change everything. 3 hours of being brave enough to stay. Total char count, 16,847.